23. Good morning to you. In minutes, my old ethnic homeland, Scotland, will be much better off because Nicola Sturgeon is going to resign unexpectedly as the First Minister of Scotland. That's not really a Prime Minister job. It's the devolution of the Scottish Home Rule to Scotland, though they are still part of the United Kingdom, and Prime Minister Sunak runs the place. But Nicola Sturgeon has been hectoring Britain forever to let Scotland have another referendum to vote no again on leaving. And she's finally worn out her welcome and she's leaving, and that's a good bit of news. Great way to begin the morning. There are lots of things that are not great. After the show yesterday, the inflation numbers came out, 6.4% year-over-year inflation. That is not, it's lower than it was the month before, and it's gone down a little bit for 9 straight months. But the core rate and inflation cooled slightly with worrying details, is how the New York Times tries to break it to you. Annual inflation cooled slightly in January as pace of moderation levels off. That's another way. That's the Wall Street Journal's way of breaking it to you. The news is it ain't going anywhere. We're stuck with Biden economics, and it's bad. The deficits are bad, the debt is atrocious, and the inflationary impact continues. So it's not 9% like it was in July. It's only 6.5% year over year. That's still way too much for seniors on fixed incomes. Their Social Security bump's already been wiped out between last year and the first quarter of this year. And if you got a fixed income problem out there, it's not getting any better. The strong dollar, in fact, according to the Financial Times, is going to lead many foreign countries like Egypt, Pakistan, Lebanon to value their currency. So everyone in those countries is immediately going to have less money because Joe Biden unleashed inflation in the United States. The Federal Reserve is doing what it has to do. They will continue to raise interest rates. I'm going to talk with Ty Lassiter of Key City Capital later this hour about what that means. Also, there is an exploding scandal on Capitol Hill on a couple of fronts. It turns out, according to the Washington Post exclusive this morning, the United States tracked the first China spy balloon from its launch on Hainan Island months ago. And we tracked it for a week. So it began in January, tracked it for a week before we shot it down. By the time a Chinese spy balloon crossed into American airspace last month, U.S. military and intel agencies have been tracking it for nearly a week, watching it as it lifted off from its home base on Hainan Island near China's south coast. U.S. monitors watched as the balloon settled into a flight path that it would appear to have taken it over U.S. territory of Guam, which is a very vital, necessary military base, of course. Somewhere along the easterly route, the craft took an unexpected northern turn, according to several U.S. officials, who said that analysts are now examining the possibility that China didn't intend to penetrate the American heartland. Oh, yeah. They floated it right over our missile fields. Then they moved it around to go right over our Charleston submarine pens. It's astonishing, the incompetence of the Biden administration. Congress is reacting. Adam Credo at the Washington Free Beacon has a story on Congress blasts Biden's secrecy on unidentified objects, plural, shot down across America. And it quotes Jim Banks, Michael Waltz, and Mike Gallagher, the three musketeers of national security in the House. And they're all just throwing up their hands. They can't learn a thing, and Team Biden is not telling them anything. They don't want to tell them anything. I don't know if we got the John Kennedy cut here. Yeah, here we go. John Kennedy. Let me say here. Did I sent you one, Generalissimo? Is it the same one you've got, or is it a different one? Cut. It's a different one. You didn't get the one I sent you, but let's play a little bit of John Kennedy. Cut number 14.
Well, Brian, if you are confused, you understand the situation perfectly. 10 days ago, we were led to believe that our skies are clear. And now, all of a sudden, we've got spy balloons and unidentified objects raining down on us like confetti. We have had one briefing by, I'll say, junior members of the Intelligence Committee. We're going to have another one today at 10 o'clock. I've listened to a lot of folks go on your show and others and talk about what's going on. But the truth is, I don't think anybody except the members of the Intelligence Committee know jack.
And by the way, the members of the Intelligence Committee are saying they don't know jack either. Biden administration is going to brief that gang of 8 on the mishandled classified files at the President Biden's many locations, President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate, Mike Pence's house. That's going to happen today. Now, the most stunning story of all is that the killer at Michigan State had a note threatening New Jersey schools. It's a crazy man, like they all are. They're crazy. But the backstory, Michigan Democrats are saying we need gun control legislation. They are not dealing with the fact that this killer was arrested and in custody and charged with a felony for felonious weapon possession and concealed weaponry. And the Soros-backed prosecutor at the time allowed him to plead to a misdemeanor, which put him on probation and got a gun. Had he been convicted of a felony, he would not have been eligible to purchase the gun. He also would have been in jail. So don't talk to me about new laws. Enforce the ones on the book and get rid of these Soros prosecutors, because that man killed 3 people and deeply wounded 5. I don't know if anyone died overnight. I haven't seen any update. I'm hoping that they all recover, the 5 who were seriously wounded. I spent parts of 2 classes yesterday talking to students today that they've always got to have a plan for every room that they're in. And it just makes me angry that Michigan Democrats are talking about gun control legislation when it was a Michigan Democratic prosecutor elected by George Soros who let the guy out. Should be in jail. In Ohio, near my hometown of Warren, Ohio, it's about 30 miles to the southeast Palestine, is the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald train. And experts have no idea. The place has drawn more plaintiffs' lawyers than Camp Lejeune because this toxic cloud is floating over it. They're afraid to drink the water. And I would get out of town. I was reading about some people that moved over to Salem to a hotel. That's not far enough away, but it's truly a mess, and they're not telling you anyone. And this is comforting. Pete Buttigieg is in charge. Somehow Pete Buttigieg went to the Rhodes Scholar who was impressing everyone on the debate stage to a complete babbling incompetent. And this one, he ought to be in East Palestine breathing the air. All right, Secretary Buttigieg, go check it out. Prosecutors, according to the New York Times, are going to seek testimony from President Trump's lawyers with regard to the Mar-a-Lago documents. According to the Times, that suggests evidence of a crime because they're talking to the lawyers. It's usually very hard to depose a lawyer for someone unless there's a fraud crime exception invoked, so they must have done that. Speaking of lawyers, I hate faculty meetings. Faculty meetings, had they existed at the time of Dante, would have been a circle of hell below Satan trapped in the ice. I hate faculty meetings. I've been going to them since 1995. I hate them. But yesterday, I actually had my world rocked by Mario Manera, who is the professor who presented on ChatGPT, artificial intelligence and the law. Mostly, he was saying, look, we got to rethink take-home tests and papers because any law student with access to these programs can produce a passing grade, and it's ChatGPT 3.5. By the time we get to 5.0, it's going to be like talking to Shakespeare. And I have been grappling with the ramifications of ChatGPT after this presentation in the law. The commodification of the law has already been going on, and people are turning into drones in law firms. But you still needed Paul Clement when you need to go to the Supreme Court. You still needed somebody who really was good. And you'll still need a lawyer for the kind of work I did, which was permit negotiation. It's not written briefs. It's not litigation. It's not corporate leasing. But the pressure on lawyering is going to go through the roof after another couple of iterations of ChatGPT because it's all written work product. And that's all going to be, it's not fake. It's not illegal. It's not unethical. At least we haven't declared it yet. But if you teach at any level, or you're an admissions counselor reading essays, it's all going to be ChatGPT stuff laced with prompts and refined by an edit. It's truly, truly changing. So I wake up this morning, I read in the Financial Times, a great British law firm, Allen & Overy, introduces AI chatbots to lawyers in search of efficiencies. And the convergence is happening. The rise of the machines. I have a ChatGPT producer already because I never had a producer before, and it's really making the show hum. Stay tuned, America. I'll be right back. I was, during the break, reading the Washington Post report on the orphans of Turkey and Syria. It is so heartbreaking. I mean, the whole thing is 37,000 people are dead. That's 10 9/11s. It's more than 10 9/11s. And there are thousands of orphans wandering around. And they've got all those sorts of spots where photos and notes are posted and children, and just two paragraphs. In one hospital ward, a 9-year-old in a soccer jersey sat chatting away to his uncle as he recovered from his injuries. He survived for 156 hours beneath the rubble before being rescued from his collapsed home. His favorite player is Cristiano Ronaldo, the boy said. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up. His uncle listened quietly. The uncle didn't tell the boy that his parents were dead. Quote, "The psychologist told us to tell him early because we don't want him to have hopes," he said. "We are waiting for him to recover physically, and then we'll tell him." That's one story of tens of thousands of stories, and it's truly the worst thing I've seen. 9/11, of course, we all lost friends and families and patriots and citizens, and we responded. And Turkey is our NATO ally, but people are just responding because it's like the Sri Lankan tsunami and the Haiti earthquake. It's just unbelievable. The banner is over at HughHewitt.com. Please be generous. The United States shot down an Iranian-made spy drone in Syria last night over our base. We have one base left in Syria, and we shot it down. And we're not going to let the Iranians spy on our troops via Syrian-launched drones. We're not. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports this morning that suspected Iranian weapons seized by the United States Navy may go to Ukraine. May? The U.S. military is considering sending Ukraine thousands of seized weapons and more than 1 million rounds of ammunition once bound for Iran-backed fighters in Yemen. An unprecedented step that would help Kyiv battle Russian forces, U.S. and European officials said. 5,000 assault rifles, 1.6 million rounds of small arms ammunition, a small number of anti-tank missiles, more than 7,000 proximity fuses. We took them off of Iranian smugglers, trying to get them to Ukraine, into Yemen to kill the pro-UAE and Saudi Arabia forces there. And they're sitting around in a warehouse and on U.S. Navy boats. Send them to Ukraine. I really don't understand this. There was a great thread on Twitter last night. If you follow me on Twitter, you can go see it, about how everything we send to Ukraine is a key contribution to degrading Russia's ability to wage war on Europe, which is to wage war on NATO allies, which is to wage war on us. It's a disaster for them. General Milley gave a press conference yesterday, and he declared that Russia has lost. And I don't think Russia has lost. Russia has lost, says top U.S. general. Russia has lost the war in Ukraine strategically, operationally, and tactically. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said in Brussels after a meeting of countries supporting Kyiv. Russian President Putin was wrong in thinking he could quickly defeat Ukraine, Milley said, adding, quote, "Ukraine remains free, they remain independent. NATO and the coalition has never been stronger." Russia, however, has done things like kidnap 6,000 Ukrainian children, put them into 43 re-education camps and institutions. This is such a war crime. It's so evil. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said Tuesday in Brussels that Moscow is, quote, "preparing for more war." Of course they are. Putin can't do anything to get out of this. He can't lose face. He can't claim victory. They're trying to get a little tactical victory in one town called Bakhmut, but they keep sending in the Wagner Group prisoners who've been freed from prison, who get mowed down in World War I style trench advancements, and it's just a nightmare. And there's nothing we can do except help Ukraine and hope that somebody in the Kremlin decides, okay, this is destroying our country. We're not going to do this anymore. And that is all we can hope for. Do want to play for you. Meanwhile, as the world careens from earthquake to war to balloons, President Biden went to the National Association of Counties yesterday and said, cut number 2.
Corporate America. You had the oil companies. You know how much they made in profit this year? $200 billion in the middle of an energy crisis. Because they bought back their stock and they're not investing in refineries, repairing them, or maintaining them. Now they're saying, and it's a legitimate argument they make, they say, Biden, you want to go you want to go green, and in 10 years we won't need this. Well, guess what? We're going to need oil for a long time. gas for a long time. It's not.
All right, so look, friends,
away.
you know, that's the most mocked line in the State of the Union. Now, you know, we're going to need oil for a long time. We're going to need oil for longer than 10 years. That's what that State of the Union will be remembered for. The fact that the President of the United States stated, I mean, it's not just Captain Obvious, it's Captain, huh? What? We're going to need oil for centuries. Centuries. And hopefully it becomes cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, and hopefully we learn how to entrap carbon and technology catches up and the amount of CO2 is lesser. But we're not going to stop using fossil fuels. Look at everything around you. Do you have any plastic on your desk? Did you drive anywhere today? Did you fly anywhere? It's so stupid. It's such a dumb thing. So the White House always does the same thing. When the president says something dumb that gets absolutely laughed at because he went off script, they immediately rinse and repeat to try and prove to you he meant to do it. That's what they always do. Oh, well, if he says the dumb thing twice, he must mean to say it. No, he doesn't. He didn't. And it still doesn't make a lick of sense. This entire speech, you know, he's not going to be president in 2 years. I really can't imagine. I know he says he's going to run for re-election. If he does, whoever the Republicans nominate is going to beat him. Whether it's Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or anybody else who eventually declares, whoever runs is going to beat him. Because the United States can't drift along. I used to say President Obama with Chance Gardner, but this is really Chance Gardner at 80. And it just doesn't, it is crazy. And the only reason a small clique of the media believes that he can be reelected is their obsession with January 6th. And that's what former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in an interview with Niall Stanage, who's a great guy from near St. Field, Northern Ireland, who works for the Hill. Mike Pompeo talked about this obsession yesterday. I wanted you to hear this. Cut number 18.
And you obsess. The media obsesses about this. I understand.
Hold on a second,
understand why it does.
The media obsesses about the fact that people tried by force to overturn an election. And more than 100 law enforcement agents were injured, and people were breaking into the United States Capitol.
All bad.
All bad by any stretch of the imagination, something to concentrate on.
Yes, well, there's lots of things to concentrate to keep the American people safe now. Many things. It's a complicated, mean, and nasty world out there. We should make no mistake about that. I don't for a second apologize for the rioters who broke into the Capitol. I've said this, I don't know, how many times? Dozens and dozens of times since then. Bad. Punish them. They should be punished for the crimes that they committed. In the same way that those folks who committed crimes in Minneapolis and Seattle and took over a small part of the town, they should be punished too. I'm a conservative. I believe in law and order. You should comply with all the laws, and when you don't, you should be punished for that. The law has a solution for those who are bad actors. And January 6th, while it was a bad day for America, I've heard it compared to Pearl Harbor. This is what the media does. This is nonsense to compare it to the men who'd lost their lives that day at Pearl Harbor and the fact that we engaged in a world war. January 6th ends with a duly confirmed president of the United States and a transition. That's a noble ending to that day.
It's a noble ending after an absolute catastrophe for America earlier on that day.
And so my book focuses on the things and outcomes that we did.
The things and outcomes that you did included having the sitting president speak at a rally earlier that day.
Yeah, sure. He spoke at the rally, absolutely.
And incited rioters.
You use your adjective. Fair enough. My book is about the things that I worked on for 4 years. I'd never described January 6th as America's proudest day. I regret that that happened. But to say that, gosh, it's a glaring omission is exactly the same storyline of the Russia hoax. It is a misfocus of a set of priorities, a deep misunderstanding of the things that deliver good outcomes for the American people.
It's a 400-page book, and there's one sentence about January 6th.
Yep, I'd do it exactly the same way again.
Yeah, Niall is a good guy. Niall's a lefty. And he wants to talk about January 6th in Mike Pompeo's book, which I've interviewed him twice about, read every page. I'm sure Niall did good prep. He wants to talk about January 6th. It misses everything in the book that matters so much, including this catastrophe in national security. Can I go back to John Kennedy with Brian Kilmeade, and let's set it up again. Cut number 14.
Well, Brian, if you are confused, You understand the situation perfectly. 10 days
now
ago,
go up to cut number
we
16.
were
John
led
Kennedy talking to
believe that
Brian. This is the part I want you to hear about Xi and compare to what Mike Pompeo and Niall Standish were talking about. This is what Brian Kilmeade asked Senator Kennedy about Xi Jinping. Cut 16.
Well, the problem is that President Xi, he just lies repeatedly. You can't trust him. As I've said before, I wouldn't trust President Xi. I wouldn't turn my back on him if he were 2 days dead. Now, the people of China are wonderful people, but they've been totally brainwashed. And
so China is our challenge. Our economy is our challenge. Inflation is not under control. The numbers yesterday prove that. Jason Furman on CNBC, cut number 17. Jason Furman is exactly on point here. Cut 17.
I look at tips. I look at swaps. They have break-evens of inflation of around 2%. I just don't see that. I don't see how we have inflation much below 3% this year. I don't see it coming down below that without a decent-sized recession, and nothing in this numbers gives me comfort. Yeah, it's not a surprise relative to the expectations we had yesterday, but compared to the narrative we had a month ago, where we thought inflation was coming down, where we thought, it was jumping off from a low point. We now have core this month at an annualized rate just for the month of January of 5.1%. Even if you take out shelter, which is lagged, and the used cars, the so-called super core, you're at an annual rate of 4.3% for this month. That's faster than the pace in the last 2 months. And that
what hasn't gone up? ReliefFactor.com hasn't gone up. It's still $19.95 for a 3-week starter pack. I take my Relief Factor in the morning in the first hour every day, my 4 pills, and I use my lukewarm coffee. And boy, do I need Relief Factor. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt is resting comfortably. She has got a little tiny bit more mobility than she did a week ago. I spent 45 minutes wandering the CVS. I've been on my feet a lot, teaching in CVS again. They ought to have an aisle for married men who don't shop. That's what they need at CVS, and they need a Relief Factor on that aisle as well. Married men who don't know how to shop for groceries or necessary, they need an aisle at CVS marked "Clueless Men, come here." And so I just put everything that we need there. And luckily, I've got my ReliefFactor.com, and I've taken it, so I can spend hours in CVS. Stay tuned, America. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live in Studio West, joined by Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, as well as chairman of the new Select Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. Good morning, Congressman Jordan. Welcome.
Good to be with you, Hugh.
Let me begin with a very specific matter. In January, in the Richmond field office of the FBI, a, quote, intelligence analyst wrote a memo. It's been withdrawn. Are you going to investigate that memo, its origins, and how in the world anyone could come to those conclusions?
Of course. Someone needs to remind some folks at the FBI that we have this thing called the First Amendment. The very first right you have under the First Amendment is the right to practice your faith and not be attacked or investigated by your government for doing so. So of course we're going to investigate. This is as wrong as it gets. But frankly, it's sort of consistent with what we've heard from whistleblowers, FBI agents who've come talk to us about the political nature that now exists at the Justice Department and within the FBI. So of course we're going to investigate this, and it sort of fits in with the same thing we saw, the memorandum a year and a half ago that launched this attack on parents who were showing up at school board meetings. The idea that you're going to have the federal government get involved in a local school board matter. If there's something wrong happening there, let the local law enforcement deal with it. Don't make it a federal issue, for goodness sake. But this seems to be the pattern, and of course we're going to investigate all of these issues.
Now, Chairman Jordan, that memo relied specifically on the Southern Poverty Law Center. It is not credible. I would like to have you subpoena the head of the Southern Poverty Law Center and talk to them about how they decided that Latin Mass attending Catholics are a national security threat. Is there any plan to get the SPLC before the committee so we can establish once and for all they are not credible?
We will start with trying to get the documents information from the FBI, from the Justice Department, and then we'll move from there. But remember, if I'm correct, it was a couple years ago, the Southern Poverty Law Center who said the Family Research Council was doing something wrong. And then, you know what happened? We hear this from the left all the time, and those of us on the conservative side, we just don't like to talk about this stuff. But what happened was someone came into the Family Research Council and shot people. Shot I think the attendant at the front desk. I'm trying to remember how that
security
all played out.
Security guard wounded.
It was terrible what happened. And this guy was like, if I remember, there was something about he had Chick-fil-A sandwiches he was going to bring in. It was this lefty attacking conservatives, and it made no sense. But it was after the Southern Poverty Law Center had said something I think similar about the Family Research Council, as you know what they did with the traditional Catholics.
So I just hope you get to the source of that misinformation. Now I want to turn to the FBI specifically, Mr. Chairman. I've got Mike Pompeo's book here, Never Give an Inch, and I've interviewed the former secretary twice. He has a long section on the January 6, 2017 meeting with President-elect Trump that was called by Director Comey, Director Brennan of the CIA, Director Clapper of the National Intelligence, and he participated in that meeting. Are you going to call those three at the same time, and I would hope with Mike Pompeo at the same time, so he can contradict their accounts of what happened? Because it is absolutely eye-opening. They ambushed the president-elect.
They sure did up there, and then they went out and leaked the information, and they could tell the press that, well, this quote dossier was so important, we briefed the president-elect on the information. And then, of course, that became the story. And they knew at the time that the dossier was a bunch of garbage. So we're focused on a number of things. The most recent that deals with some of the people you talked about there is the 51 folks who signed this now famous letter, 51 former intelligence officials, where they said that, oh, this has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation, referring to the Hunter Biden laptop story. So we're looking at that, and it's been interesting in the last couple of days that Mr. Clapper suddenly changed, and he's saying, well, we said it could have been Russian information operation. Well, that's certainly not what you conveyed at the time. That's not how the press conveyed it at the time. And you certainly didn't say that in just those days before the most important election we have in our country, which is the election for president of the United States. So we're focused in that area right now and beginning to get information and having people cooperate with us who were part of that 51 folks who signed that now famous letter.
What about these three specific people, Clapper, Brennan, and Comey? Are you going to bring them, put them under oath, and let the American people hear an explanation of that meeting? Because I've never heard it, and I need to hear it because I think that is the source of the Russia hoax that did so much to destroy this country's momentum in the last 5 years.
Yeah. We got everything is on the table for what we're going to do. We are actively trying to get information from these various agencies. We're talking with whistleblowers. Our third deposition of an FBI whistleblower happens today. We've had two in the last couple of weeks. We're going to continue to build. And if that's where our investigation leads, then we're happy to do that.
Congressman Goldman, after one hearing, said there's nothing there. There's no there. Now, of course, Congressman Goldman is part of the Schiff fiasco. So it's not likely he's the best source, but he's on your subcommittee. What do you do with people who do not have ears to hear or eyes to see?
Yeah, well, there used to be a time where the Democrats actually valued the First Amendment, because remember, part of this is, and we had Professor Turley as one of our witnesses last week in our first hearing, and I thought he coined the best phrase when he said we now have censorship by surrogate, where you have the FBI pressuring and priming big tech companies, and we know this because of the Twitter files, to take action that the government couldn't otherwise take, and that's exactly what happened in the run-up to the 2020 election, and with other issues, Russia issue and everything else. So it used to be Democrats valued the First Amendment, valued particularly the right to speak in a political fashion and not be harassed for doing so. But that doesn't seem to be the case now. So I even said in my opening statement, I hope Democrats will work with us. The Constitution is not partisan. The First Amendment is not partisan. Equal treatment under the law, it should not be a partisan issue. It should be what we all embrace because it's America.
Now, Chairman Jordan, you and I both know. Did we lose him? His phone just dropped. Okay, we will get the chairman both back. I was about to say to him, the Democrats are not going to cooperate. I know that. You know that. Everybody listening to this show knows that. They're not going to cooperate. So I want to know, how long do we give them the opportunity to not cooperate before the subpoenas fly? Because I know what Adam Schiff did, all in the service of what he has now announced, his effort to become the next senator from California. He is running for Senate in California. He declared it. Dianne Feinstein announced her retirement yesterday under pressure from Barbara Lee, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter. Every Democrat in California wants to run for Senate. And Adam Schiff spent 4 years preparing for this, and he's not going to cooperate. No one's going to cooperate. So if the congressman, he's back. Mr. Chairman, I was about to ask you, I don't believe the Democrats will cooperate for 1 day with you. Yeah. How long will you give them in a grace period before the subpoenas start to fly?
Well, we've already sent some, and we're going to continue to use the compulsory means to get information, use every means we can to get information. But you're right. I have my doubts. The very day we debated the resolution on the floor, creating the House, the select subcommittee, I think it was Representative Nadler said, we're going to fight you guys tooth and nail. I think Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, said the same thing. So again, that's unfortunate. But if that's the path they take, then we're still going to do our work, because constitutionally we're required to do oversight, part of our duty, and then we're going to come up with the legislation that we think will help fix the problem. That's what we're also supposed to do as legislators, and we're committed to accomplishing our goal.
Now, when you say weaponization, I think the Bureau. Now, I know the Bureau. I worked with the Bureau when I was at Justice. I think the Bureau is extraordinarily competent in some areas, but the politicization is obvious. I blame Comey primarily, but Stroke and others. How do you fix the personnel policy? I ran OPM for years. How do you get the new director the authority to get rid of the problem politicized partisans in the Bureau's ranks?
I think, one, it probably requires a new president to put in place the kind of people across the administration who understand that the government is supposed to serve the people, not target the people. Second, I do think you have to keep as much power out in the field offices, not in the Washington field office and in the headquarters. We heard that theme now several from our whistleblowers. We heard it from our witnesses last week, Nicole Parker and Tom Baker, who are former FBI officials. So I think those two things make sense. And then, frankly, we're going to have to change some things. Like, one of the things I think is interesting is, why does everyone keep a security clearance when they leave government? I would bet those 51 former intel officials who signed that now famous letter, I would bet they all still have a security clearance. Maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe there's a reason for it, but I think that's something we should look at. There's a host of things I think we need to examine and recommend legislatively how those things can be corrected and improved, and we're going to look at all that.
Mr. Chairman, speed matters here. This cannot be a 2-year march through the desert. How quickly will any of the 51 appear in public so the people of the United States understand that they were just wrong on Hunter Biden? I'm not even concerned about Hunter Biden. I'm concerned that the American people understand that people lie for political reasons, or they jump to the conclusion that serves their narrative.
Yeah, we're gonna push to go as fast as possible. We have a number of hearing ideas that are lined up, but at the same time, you got to go get the documents. You got to do the depositions, and so it's all the above, and that's the only way you get the facts. I'm already amazed at some of the things we've learned from the whistleblowers that we just didn't know. The pressure from the Washington field office and headquarters on going after people who were in the nation's capital on January 6th. People who didn't do anything wrong, and yet they were being pressured to investigate these folks. If people did something wrong, of course you're going to investigate those. And we heard from a guy in the Boston field office who said, the Washington field office told us, you need to investigate these two people. Here's a picture of them inside the Capitol. Here's the other 138 who were on the 2 buses that came down with this group. We want you to investigate them as well. And they said, well, on what basis? Well, you need to investigate them. Are you having pictures of them in the Capitol doing anything wrong? Any evidence? They go, no, we just investigated them because they came down with these other 2 guys. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. You're allowed to, in America, attend a political rally. It's called First Amendment protected speech. You're allowed to do that. We'll investigate the guys who deserve to be investigated, but we're not going to investigate the other 138 that you want us to. So that's the kind of political influence that we see. So the more we learn, I think that'll point us to who we need to have in front of us in a public hearing, and then we'll make sure we do that.
All right, last couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. I want to come back to Director Comey. The original sin, everything that went wrong in America goes back to that January 6th, 2017 meeting. So I want the director under oath being questioned by you in control of the gavel. What is the latest date by which that will happen?
Well, I don't know. It'll be in the course of this Congress, because we have this select subcommittee, as the Speaker's done, is for this Congress. I do agree with you. That meeting, I think, was critically important, because also remember what Chuck Schumer said. He said, you mess with the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. That was at the same time that this meeting then took place, where they went up there to set up President Trump and his team before he ever assumed office. So that's how serious that meeting was. And we do need to make sure we get all the facts to the American people.
I hope you bring Pompeo in at the same time, because he will contradict everything the other three say. Chairman Jim Jordan, always good to talk to a fellow Buckeye. Thank you for joining me this morning. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Chairman Mike Gallagher is MIA. And I think that's because they realize that Aaron Rodgers is leaving Green Bay and he's taken to bed. I think it's probably reduced him to an inability to deal with the world, as Wisconsin's hopes and dreams of future NFL glory vanished in a haze of Patrick Mahomes' brilliance, and Aaron Rodgers heading for the Jets, and the Packers are in a disaster land. Maybe he'll call in. He might change his mind when he figures out that he's late. Oh, he is there. Congressman Gallagher, welcome. I was just saying I thought maybe you'd taken to your bed because Aaron Rodgers is going to the Jets. I mean, I'm glad to see you're up and about. And I began with Senator Fischer by pointing out that Nebraska isn't the worst Big Ten team. They're still Wisconsin. So it's good to have you.
Well, it's great to be welcomed in such fashion, Hugh. You know, I hate being late. I try and live my life on the Lombardi time principle. In truth, I was doing an interview in a van outside my house in pitch darkness, which went 5 minutes late. And then I sprinted back to my basement so as not to be late for you. But I wasted a minute waiting for you to call me on Skype, which is no longer how we operate. So it's a real logistical nightmare at the Gallagher home here in Green Bay, Wisconsin right now. It's very warm, though. I'll say that. It's
Mr. Chairman, we are constantly technologically advancing like the Chinese. And so you got to keep up with the chat GPT producer that I hired to replace Dwayne. But Chairman, let's get serious. I read the Adam Credo piece in the Free Beacon that quotes the big three: Jim Banks, Mike Waltz, Mike Gallagher. You're the three serious guys about China. And what the administration has told everyone, apparently including you, is not reassuring. What do we know about what the Chinese are doing in our skies?
Well, we're also called the Three Amigos, and we have kind of matching outfits, and we have a whole chant that we do together. Future Senator Jim Banks, though, so we're going to need someone to replenish our trio in the House. So if you have any candidates, I'd be interested. Here's the bottom line. I think there are a few questions that remain unanswered. Well, first, there is the first incident, which is the Chinese spy balloon incident, which is probably the most troubling. And now we have these three subsequent shoot-downs, including one that transited over Wisconsin and was ultimately shot down over Lake Huron. For the latter three, the recovery effort is still underway. And until we recover the material, until we analyze it, we're not going to know where it came from or whether it was a spy balloon or some sort of other unidentified aerial phenomenon. Now, if it turns out that these were the subsequent three were from foreign adversaries, that would be a big deal. I mean, I've spoken with people at the highest level, and they understand that that would be a big deal, particularly if it was revealed that these were all from China. But we don't have that information yet. For the first incident, I have not yet been satisfied with answers to basic questions such as, why didn't we shoot it down earlier? If we figured out how to shoot it down without risk of civilian casualties, why didn't we shoot it down? Why would we have known about it if it weren't for the intrepid reporting of the Montana Billings Gazette? Why am I learning about things as a member of the Intel Committee, Armed Services Committee, from the Montana Billings Gazette? Would the administration have revealed this to us, or would it let the balloon lazily drift over the United States so as not to imperil Secretary Blinken's visit to China? And finally, and perhaps what is unknowable, is whether the CCP and Xi Jinping intentionally timed this espionage effort with Secretary Blinken's visit to send a message to us, a message such as, here's what we can do to you and get away with, and you'll do nothing. So there's a lot of questions to you. I guess if I could add one more thing, we've had reports of UAPs for years. It's why Congress set up an office called AARO and force the administration to take this issue seriously. Now, I know a lot of people dismiss it because it instantly becomes a talk about aliens. But here's the reality. Things are showing up on our training ranges. They're fouling our ranges, like the ranges our pilots fly around to train on, and we don't know what they are. If for no other reason than we want our pilots to be safe, that's a problem. And these latter three incidents may reveal that this stuff is happening at a scale that we didn't understand before because we have no process for detecting and neutralizing these things when they appear on our ranges.
Chairman, are you surprised that we do not have the ability to net these? And by that, I mean, I'm not talking about Wile E. Coyote and Acme Inc. and the devices that go wrong. But when we wanted the Soviet submarine that sunk, Howard Hughes built the Glomar Explorer in 1971. It deployed in 1973, and we had a Soviet submarine in 1974. In 3 years, we went from, hey, we got to get that, to having it and grabbing it. How can we not be able to grab a balloon? It's a balloon.
Initially, the suggestion was that, well, these are too high altitude in order to net and grab it, to which I suggest we'll bring it down to a lower altitude. But the first one, I think, was at 60,000 feet or less. So that shouldn't pose an issue. So this should be that kind of Apollo 13 moment where you lock all the nerds in a room and say, you know, if we don't have this capability already, we better darn well develop it, because this won't be the last time we're dealing with things like this. And indeed, the best option would be for us to gain control of it without destroying it, so we can grab it, look under the hood, see what's going on, reverse engineer technology if we wanted to do that, or use it for the purpose of educating the American people as to what we're facing in the Chinese Communist Party. There are times, of course, Hugh, when we need to err on the side of secrecy, particularly when you're dealing with sensitive sources and methods. But I think now is a time that demands transparency. I think once the Pentagon and the FBI and the intelligence community are finished analyzing the debris that we've recovered off the coast of the Carolinas, I think they should put that thing on display. I think they should take it on a tour of the United States and say, here's what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to us. They have no respect for our sovereignty. They're flying balloons over the continental United States. This is who we're dealing with in the CCP. And don't believe, you know, all this, don't believe the charm offensive that we've seen in recent weeks from the CCP.
Chairman Gallagher, there's a specific claim that has been made that I'd like you to speak to, and I'm not going to comment on it. I want to hear you speak to it, which is not to worry. They've got satellites. They get to see it anyway. Is there any additional spy capability that comes with a balloon at 60, 40, 20,000 feet, or should we just throw the country open because they've got spy satellites? It made no sense to me. What do you think of that claim?
I think it's totally bogus, to use a gentler term than the one that came to my mind. I can't comment on the specific capabilities, but imagine this. Okay, let's just say this was completely innocuous, or it had limited collection capability. In fact, let's just say it couldn't collect anything that you couldn't get with commercial imagery and $10. Well, it doesn't take a massive stretch of your imagination to think about how they could use such a balloon in a wartime scenario, either to confuse us, to get inside our OODA loop, our decision-making cycle, or potentially to weaponize a balloon like this.
OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act, by the way, for the benefit. You just broke the rule.
But, Hugh, you should know, in my first hearing as chairman of the Cyber and Innovation Subcommittee on Armed Services, I outlined the 3 commandments that we have to follow, and one of them is thou shalt not use acronyms or jargon. So I'm
like
trying,
OODA? Like OODA.
Like OODA. OODA loop is something that's attributed to the great John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot who revolutionized the military. But as a Marine, we adopted Boyd as an honorary Marine, and so we used the jargon. But my point is this: even if this particular balloon had limited intelligence collection value, you got to think about this in terms of one key part of an overall architecture that the PLA could use in a wartime scenario in order to get inside our decision-making cycle, or in order to identify targets for the PLA rocket force to strike. And there was a great Financial Times article that talked about how this is already being incorporated into PLA rocket force doctrine, how in 2018 there was a video of a balloon that actually had missiles on it that is subsequently disappeared from Chinese social media. So I don't buy that dismissing of it. And it also contradicts the narrative now, which is, oh my gosh, this is an intelligence bonanza. we're geniuses for letting this thing drift over the United States so as to shoot it down over the Atlantic and collect it again. So it doesn't make any sense.
Last question. I had Senator Fischer on to scare my audience about the Chinese strategic forces buildup. Are you worried that that balloon array, which drifted specifically to Montana and other triad fields of strategic nuclear weaponry, that they are gaining the capability to jam and disable our strategic forces via information interjection, that they can screw up our circuitry, they can blow the fuses, they can be like Dwayne and throw the power off? Do they have the ability to sort of EMP on a localized basis and stop us from deploying weaponry?
Short answer is I don't yet know if they have that level of capability, but it does strike me as a coincidence on the level of, or maybe almost on the level of a pandemic emerging in Wuhan near the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that these things were spotted near Malmstrom and some of our most sensitive military bases. In other words, I don't think it was a coincidence, particularly because the first incident, based on public reporting, they had the ability to control the direction and the flight path, which may have not been the same for incidents 2, 3, and 4. You know, one thing is absolutely certain to me, putting aside the balloon for a second, they are going to target our domestic infrastructure with cyber weapons if we find ourselves in a hot war over Taiwan. And so if nothing else, this incident should hammer home to the American people that this isn't just an over there problem. This is a right here at home problem. And, you know, in the world we live, you can't just sort of ignore problems just because you think they're thousands of miles away.
Quick exit, Chairman Gallagher. Is the national news media paying attention to the Select Committee on the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party?
Not to the extent necessary, I think. But the good news is when we come back into session on the 27th, we're going to start sprinting now that we've gotten all the behind-the-scenes stuff taken care of. Now that we have Democrats, we're going to have our first hearing on the night of the 28th. So stay tuned for that. We're going to try and
didn't know that
posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
I hope every network carries 228. It's going to be a hearing. Is Fox, is CNN going to cover the hearing?
We're going to try and make that happen. Some networks are not quite as attuned to this issue as they were to the January 6th.
I'm not going to tune into MSNBC. That's not going to happen. Chairman Mike Gallagher, thank you as always. You're late, but like the Packers, you show up, at least for the game. May not be on time, but you show up for the game. Not in the Super Bowl, though. Chairman Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back with Olivia Beavers of Politico. Stay tuned. He's competitive. Good morning, Senator Fischer. Welcome. Good to have you.
Well, good morning, Hugh. Say that was a little harsh there on not being always competitive. So we're hoping for the glory years to return.
I could be harsher if, you know, Congressman Gallagher is coming along, and I usually just roll over Wisconsin. So, Senator, let's get to your op-ed, which posted just a couple hours ago over at Fox. It is eye-opening. It's about the Chinese Communist Party and General Secretary Xi's strategic weaponry buildup. And I knew about this intellectually, but the numbers you put here are astonishing. You want to summarize for the audience, because you are the ranking member on the strategic subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee. What is Xi up to?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Hugh. You know, we have to recognize as a country, and the people of this country have to recognize the threat that China poses. You know, with the balloons coming across the United States, the surveillance there across the continental United States, I think that woke a lot of people up. But China has been building up its nuclear enterprise, and we have been slow to modernize ours. When I look at what they have accomplished in a very, very short period of time, it is truly amazing. They are a pure competitor. They have a triad. They have a goal of tripling their arsenal by 2035. That's only a decade away. They have more ICBM launchers than the United States. They have bombers, a bomber similar to the B-2, and they are building submarines. So this is something that people need to be aware of. And I don't put this out there to scare people, to terrify them. but instead to educate them about what we face. You know, we've seen since the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've kind of been sidelined in this nation with our enterprise, our nuclear enterprise, and we cannot be, because it's the bedrock of our national security.
Now, Senator, I have asked a number of would-be presidential nominees, if the triad cannot be fully funded, which third of it do we not fund? Because we've got to do something. And I know the Columbia class, the B-21, they're both in production. They're going forward. We're not doing it fast enough. I'm wondering if we're past the era of ICBMs, except for a second strike capability. You're the ranking member of the Strategic Affairs Subcommittee. What do you think about shrinking the missile leg of the triad in order to spend what we need on the most survivable legs of the triad?
Oh, I disagree with that completely. The triad, each leg of the triad, serves a unique purpose, and we have to have those ICBMs. For one thing, I personally believe it makes our adversaries take a step back and think about attacking the heartland of the United States, because that's where our ICBM silos are. That alone causes them to rethink any kind of aggressive action that they would have. It is also an extremely vital part. I don't think many people also realize, Hugh, that our bombers are not loaded. So in effect, right now, we have a triad, or we have a dyad with our submarines and our ICBMs. So there would have to be policy changes and buy-in from Congress to be able to change our posture when it comes to our bombers.
Well, Senator, I want to pursue this with you. I would build it all. I would spend the money, but we just spent $7 trillion in emergency spending, and none of it went to the industrial base to maintain the strategic deterrent we have, much less expand the B-21 production, the Columbia-class production. I don't know that you're going to get your Democratic colleagues to spend more than what we spent plus 3% or whatever the inflation number is. I don't know if we can afford it because Democrats won't spend. You and I agree we should modernize all parts of the triad and maybe add a new leg in space, but we're just not spending the money because Democrats don't want to.
You know, that's a mission that I've embraced in my time in the Senate and on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, is to try and get senators from both sides of the aisle more involved in this discussion. And I believe we have in the Senate. You'll see support for our modernization to keep us on schedule when it comes to the triad and the platforms that we have. There is buy-in. There is recognition of the threats that we face and just what we need in order to address them. Remember, we have two peer competitors when it comes to our nuclear forces, Russia and China. We didn't have to face that before either. Yeah. And as I said earlier, when you look at the aggression, the testing, the pokiness in the eye that the Chinese are blatantly doing now, I think, at least on the Senate side, people have stepped up.
You know, Senator, they've never lurched. China has never lurched for first strike ability before. And I'm a veteran of the Reagan years.
They danced around it. That's kind of, what we thought was their posture when it came to their nuclear forces. And they've shown clearly that is not their posture.
Well, that's what your op-ed is so eye-opening about. It looks like they're trying to get first strike capability and counting on American incoherence to allow our triad to decay to the point where they could Pearl Harbor us. I go back to the era of the MX missile debate when it dominated Time magazine, and we used to look at those charts, and the American public understood the number of missiles that Russia had, the number of missiles the Soviets had, the number of missiles the Americans had, and the fact that we had survivability. I don't know that we do except at sea right now. What do you think?
I believe we do. I think we have strong capabilities. As I said, I think each leg of the triad serves a very unique purpose. And so that's why I'm definitely a huge supporter that we modernize our triad, keep it on schedule, and be able to hopefully even speed it up. But there again, you get into the manufacturing of what we need and what we are facing there with time limits, constraints that we have, and not being able to, no matter how much money you're going to put behind it, it would be a challenge to be able to speed it up to any substantial degree.
Senator, is the B-21 fleet on schedule? That's our strategic bomber. And do you think the Columbia class will get into the water when we need it to get into the water? Because I have read astonishingly alarming stories on our industrial base. It's just not there. We've allowed it to disintegrate.
I worry about that all the time. And I think it's important to keep funding, as I said, with the modernization, to take into consideration and be able to fund with the inflation costs that are out there, to make sure our industrial base knows that we are committed to certain programs and they need to keep them online. All of those play into the timeline that we have.
Now, Senator King is a serious guy across the aisle when it comes to strategic security. Who else works with you? Because you need 60 votes to move anything forward, especially on the appropriations side. And the House can support you right now in a defense budget that's serious about the deterrent. But who will be the 10 Democrats who come alongside of the 49, or the 11 Democrats who come alongside the 49 Republicans to vote for a serious defense budget?
Mm-hmm. I think when you look at the last 2 years, the budget that President Biden sent to us and the overwhelming support that we had in the Senate Armed Services Committee to add to that budget, to increase it, because, again, there's an understanding there of the needs, and to see support on the floor, too. Senator King is wonderful to work with, and we have a great working relationship on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. Our staffs work well together. We have a kind of a mind meld when it comes to what we need. There are a lot of other good members out there. Jean Shaheen is great. Jack Reed is a good chairman of the committee. Mark Kelly is an active, good member on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. So there's a number of good members on both sides of the aisle.
I got the 4 there, so I hope you can find me 7 more Democrats who are serious about deterring China from ever thinking about Pearl Harboring us, because they look like they're building that capacity. Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska, always a pleasure to talk to you. I have tweeted out a link to her must-read article posted at Fox News this morning. It'll wake you up more than your cup of coffee. Go and read it, America, and come right back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.